And then he goes on, he says here in verse 20, "For why should you, my son, be taken up with a strange woman and embrace the bosom of a foreigner, the one whom God has not given you?" And then a warning, "For the ways of a man," and in one translation it says, "the ways of all husbands are before the eyes of the Lord." The Lord is watching all husbands, even when their wives are not watching them. That's the meaning. Your wife's not watching you at that moment, but the Lord's watching you, brother. And He's watching all His ways. That means long before it speaks about the outward action in the second part of verse 21, He watches His paths. The paths are the outward action, but long before the paths, He starts taking those paths. There are ways in His heart. He sits and He plans. I think I'll just go that way. Or maybe drop in and visit that person. And the Lord's already watched it. This thing that's going on in the mind of this husband. The Lord watches. And the Lord doesn't stop him. The Lord doesn't bring an earthquake or lightning to stop him. Yeah, you go. If you don't fear me, go any way you like. You can go to hell if you want. It's an amazing thing that God allows millions of people to go to hell every day. Have you thought of that? Every day. He sees millions going to hell and He doesn't stop. Because He's given them the Word. He sees believers living in Babylon, living after the lust of their flesh, thinking they have accepted Christ, going to hell. And He doesn't stop them. Yeah, if you want to deceive yourself and go. I've given you my Word, you haven't taken it seriously. Yeah, his own iniquities will capture the wicked. It's not that God sends him to hell, it's his own iniquities take him there. And he will be held with the cords of his sin. And that's another thing young people must remember, that once you get into a sin, you commit a sin once, and it binds you. And then it draws you to do it again, binds you once more. And then draws you, binds you once more. Each time, one more knot, one more knot, one more knot, one more knot. Think of that every time you sin in this area. A lustful thought, a dirty sexual deed, one more knot, one more knot, one more knot. What an idiot a man has got to be to give himself to the devil like this, little by little by little by little by little. And that's how the world's full of people, and even so-called Christians. I'm sorry to say, there is not the fear of God that there should be among believers. They don't see that God is watching them. All they know is their wife is not watching them. That's all. All right? The Word of God says he will die because he didn't take correction. And in the greatness of his own folly, he will go astray into an eternal hell. Because anyone lives after the flesh, he shall die. That's clear. It's a very strong warning that Solomon gives here to young people. Amazing. A very strong warning. Now he goes on to another subject. Let me just say this in passing. The sad thing is that the man who wrote this book, you know what happened to him? He did not live according to what he taught others. He who said, don't go near those women, control yourself, don't go one step that way, steer clear. You think this is a really wholehearted brother? Sometimes we can be deceived when we hear people get up and share the word, and we think they are wholehearted brothers. And if you had heard Solomon get up and preach something like this, you think he's really wholehearted. And he was perhaps in the beginning, but he began to take it easy and slipped up and finally went in deep, more deep than any of the other kings, deep into the very sin that he warned other people against with women. What does it teach us? We can preach the greatest high-sounding doctrines in the whole world, and if we don't keep our body under control, we can preach to others and be cast away ourselves. That's what Paul says. Lest I preach to others and I be a castaway myself. So don't think just because we understand it and we are sharing it with so many, therefore we are spiritual. Far from it. The question is, in my daily life, am I subduing my body? Am I controlling my eyes? Am I controlling my thoughts? Am I controlling my tongue? Am I hating my own self-life? Do I mourn? Do I hunger and thirst for righteousness? If I'm not doing all this, I can talk more wonderful things than Solomon and end up worse than Solomon. And Solomon will rise up in judgment against me one day and say, hey, I didn't know about the new and living way. You fellows talked about something higher than even me. And what was your final end? What type of life did you live in private? What type of thought life did you have? And Solomon will rise up in judgment against us. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Self-control, a very important area of wisdom. He will die for lack of instruction. It says in verse 23, in some translations it says, he dies because he's got no self-control in his life. No self-control. Brothers and sisters, the fruit of the Spirit is self-control. One of the most important verses for charismatic, Pentecostal, Spirit-filled people. The fruit of the Spirit is self-control. Self-control over your tongue, self-control over your eyes, self-control over your thoughts, self-control in your eating, self-control in many, many things. The fruit of the Spirit is self-control. And he will die because he's got no self-control in his life. Now he moves on to another subject, and that is the subject of being a surety for a stranger. That means agreeing to pay somebody else's debt. Somebody wants an agreement signed for something, and he needs somebody who will stand as a guarantee, saying, in case this fellow doesn't pay up, I will pay up. And doesn't that sound like a very loving thing to do? Yeah, we have so many human understanding of love is quite different from a divine understanding of love. And he says, my son, if you have become surety for your neighbor and have given a pledge for a stranger. Here is a person whom you don't know too well. He's a friend, at the same time he's a stranger. You know, that's the type of people we have relationship with most of the time. Person who lives next door and yet you don't know him so well. You can't say you don't know him at all. He's a neighbor and a stranger. That's what it says here. For your neighbor, but he's a stranger, and you have decided to stand guarantee for him. He says, that's a stupid thing to do. Don't do it. Have you been snared with the words of your mouth? You sat there and he said so many nice things to you, the honey dripped from his mouth, and you just agreed to it. And you came back home and you realized you're caught. You've been caught with the words of your own mouth. You gave your promise to that man. What shall you do now? You know what the Word of God says? Go and retract that promise. Go back and tell him, sorry, please forgive me. I can't do that. I gave a little more thought to it. Don't be so foolish to think, oh, I gave my word, now I have to stick to it. Well, you gave your word foolishly. Now you've got a little more wisdom and you realize it's a foolish thing to do. Go back, do this, my son, and deliver yourself. That's not a mark of love. It's a foolish promise made. Go and retract it. Deliver yourself. Because you have come now under the power of your neighbor. And God does not ever want us to be under the power of another man. You have been bought with a price. Don't become the servants and slaves of men. You have committed yourself and you're bound to that person now. He's got power over you. Go, it says, humble yourself. I think it's the only book in the Old Testament where you find this new covenant exhortation. Humble yourself. It's really a new covenant book, this. Go humble yourself. Don't stand on your dignity and what will he think of me that I'm a person who goes back on my word. Never mind what he thinks of you. Go humble yourself and plead and beg with your neighbor, I'm sorry for giving my word, but please let me take it back. I can't. When are you going to do it? You came back home at 10:30 at night after talking to this person. You say you'll go next morning. He says, no, don't give sleep to your eyes. Go immediately. Verse 4. Don't give slumber to your eyelids. Go right now. Deliver yourself. Do you see how earnestly he says, don't go and say that you will pay somebody else's debts. That's not a mark of love. There's a lot of foolish love, so-called love. Foolish love in the area of money. In helping other people financially, we find a tremendous amount of folly even among believers. Particularly when they are young. They're so stupid. And that's why you find in the Acts of the Apostles chapter 4 that those early believers never gave their money directly to the poor. They gave it to the apostles, and the apostles gave it because they had a little more wisdom. But, of course, today we are very smart ourselves, you see. We don't need anybody else, and we do a lot of foolish things. Oh. We can think of all the people who have come here and swindled so many people even in our own assembly. Yeah. When will we learn? When will we learn? Yeah, there's an area where we got to learn wisdom. All this foolish love. Humble yourself, brother. Acknowledge that you're quite stupid. You got money, but you got no wisdom. How to handle it. And if you want to help the poor, give it to someone who knows who's got a little more wisdom than you to be able to help in a wise way. Go humble yourself. Don't think that love is to stand, I will support you and I will take care of your debts. No. Don't give sleep to your eyes. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hunter's hand, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler. Urgent. Get out of a trap. You're in a trap. Now don't get stuck there. Get out of it immediately. So there's an exhortation. If you have given a guarantee to support someone, maybe financially, or to pay someone's debts, get out of it. Then another area he says about laziness. I told you that the book of Proverbs has got a lot of things to say about fools and about lazy people. They both go together. Lazy people means spiritually lazy, those who are not wholehearted. And he says, go to school, go to the ant, O sluggard, or like one translation says, go to school with the ant. Go to school with the ant and learn something from that ant. Now when God created Adam, he said, you're going to have dominion over all the animals and birds and fish and everything. But it's a pretty pathetic state that man has come to now, that he has to now go to the ant and say, please teach me, sir. I've got something to learn from you. Man's become such a fool spiritually. And this is particularly to those who are lazy, those who are not wholehearted. Observe her ways. Open your eyes, he says, and see that ant. How hard working it is. How hard working it is. You want to learn wisdom? Learn it from the ant, who has no elder brother, verse 7, nobody to give any exhortations, no overseer. But without all that, that ant does the job of preparing her food in the summer and gathering her provision in the harvest. That means this ant prepares for the future. It knows that small little thing. The brain is even smaller than that. And inside that brain, it's got a little bit of intelligence. Yeah, time may come when there may not be so much food around. So I better stack up some. And I suppose there must be ants somewhere in Palestine or somewhere that do exactly like this. Gather up food in the summer and in the harvest time and keep it somewhere. Without any exhortation or any elder brother, it thinks about the future. Of course, that ant's future is only here on this earth. It just thinks about the winter. That's the future. But for us, we are not ants. We've got a future in eternity. He says, think about that. Think, have you laid up some treasure for eternity? Are you going to be a beggar for all eternity because you just enjoyed yourself now? That's the primary exhortation. To think about the future in terms of eternity. But also, it has relation to our life on earth also, because we are not going to die tonight. We may live for a few years, and we want to think, I don't want to live in such a way, carelessly spending everything I get, so that 6 months from now I have a sudden extra need, some hospitalization, some expenditure that I cannot avoid, and then I have to beg. I have to borrow. I have to go to the moneylenders. Because I did not learn from the ant. I thought I was so spiritual. I was like George Muller. And I discovered in the moment of need, I was worse than the ant. I had to beg and borrow. Because I don't know how to discipline myself. I don't know how to lay up a little bit for the future. We find there's a tremendous need for that exhortation. How long will you lie down, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to the rest. Finally you become poor. And poverty grabs you. It's amazing what we can learn from the ant in that heat of summer. It works hard. I've seen these two ants helping to carry a little piece of sugar, one bearing the loads of the other, without any overseer, without any exhortations. They know how to bear one another's burdens and really carry the food there, and we got to eat it up a little later. Think of that. Observe her ways and be wise, hard working. Always looking, where can I get something to eat and lay up something for the future? Think to be like that in terms of eternity. Lord, I want to live for the future. I want to live for that which is eternal, not for that which is just going to pass away. I don't want to just enjoy my life and have a comfortable life here. I want to think, has my life counted for God? Have I laid up treasure in heaven? Then let me learn something from the ant. And the question is, verse 9, when will you arise from your sleep? Or paraphrase it like this, when will you become wholehearted, brother? When will you become wholehearted about eternal things? When will we finish with being occupied with temporal things? When will we become wholehearted? There's a spiritual laziness that these words rebuke us out of. Think of eternity. Think of the future. And lay up treasure, like Jesus said, where moth and rust cannot corrupt, where we can have something when we go up into eternity. We'll close there.